Hey y'all, what's up? John Christopoulos, TheMorgile here for a bit of a different subject material than I usually cover in my videos. Many of you who are familiar with my work know that I'm not exactly a Bible thumper. I really do disagree with the institutionalized religions on so many levels, especially the quote-unquote Holy Roman Empire, which exists to this day under the guise of the Roman Catholic Church. I guess I should explain this a bit, as I don't want to sound prejudiced. I have nothing against Catholics. My mom was raised a Catholic, but I do have a problem with an institution responsible for horrible acts throughout history, claiming to represent Christ on earth. A couple quick examples. One would be the whole pedophilia thing within the Roman Catholic Church, but another big one would be known as the Holy Crusades, where the quote-unquote Holy Roman Empire commissioned millions of knights to travel to the Middle East and slaughter innocent men, women, and children for ideological and material motives. The knights were, quote, guaranteed salvation in heaven by the leader of the Holy Roman Empire if they went on these quests to go and out and murder and pillage, which is about as anti-Christian as you can possibly get. I mean, murder for Jesus, right? Incidentally, the Crusades spawned some really quite insidious and quite evil secret societies, such as the Knights Templar and the Order of the Dragon, just as a couple examples. The Knights Templar remain a, quote, holy society to this day, and the Order of the Dragon, which was established by the King of Hungary, ultimately spawned the infamous Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dracul, or Dracula, who was indeed the grandson of one of the original Knights of the Order of the Dragon. Briefly, another such awful decree by the Holy Roman Empire was the Inquisition, where hundreds or thousands or who knows how many innocent women and children were tortured and burned at the stake for apparently being accused of witchcraft or Satan worship. Any honest Christian must admit that Christ would never condone murdering people for any reason, especially innocent men, women, and children. The fact that the Roman Empire essentially co-opted Christianity long ago under the reign of the Roman Emperor Constantine, and what they did was, the long and short of it is they simply merged their existing pagan idols and festivals with some of the ideologies of Christianity. They sort of picked and chose the books that they wanted in the Bible, mistranslated all sorts of things, things that I verified for myself, mistranslations from the original text to the King James Version. The end result of this charade, starting with Constantine and ending with the Holy Roman Empire, is, and what we have today in terms of the Vatican, is an evil den of vipers presenting themselves as Christ's vicars on earth and deceiving many, many millions of people into accepting false doctrines and ideologies which are somehow passed off as Christian. Just for one example, worshiping at the statue of Mary is exactly the same thing as worshiping at the statue of Isis or Ishtar, the pagan Roman and goddess who has many other names. Same statue, just change the name from Ishtar to Mary, right? Well, I would say by your fruits you will know them. So just because they claim to come in the name of Christ doesn't mean anything when you look at their actions and how despicable the Holy Roman Empire has been throughout recorded history. Now, with that being said, before I get started with my testimonial, which is extremely personal, and I realize most people won't believe me, I feel that it is something that I must share, even if it's at the expense of all my subscribers, so be it. I've got pretty awesome subscribers, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. Besides, YouTube is involuntarily unsubscribing all my subscribers anyway, so at this point I'm sort of indifferent and sort of resigned to the, this is what's going to happen. However, it's made me extremely motivated to reach as many people as possible with this message before I'm forced to be finished with YouTube, which is right around the corner, actually. So anyway, don't forget to jump through hoops and ring the bell if you want to stay posted on new videos as they come out. And hopefully I'll be able to continue making videos for as long as possible. So, for a little background, I should have been dead long time ago, more than once. In fact, I was clinically dead for less than a minute when I was very young. I remember the experience so vividly. I had estimated it, throughout my life to have happened when I was about 5 years old, thinking back on it. Now, just the other day, my mother told me that we were discussing this incident on the phone, just sort of came up in the conversation, that I was actually less than a year old when this happened. So I'll just go ahead and split the difference with her and say I was about three, early 1980s, simply because my memory of the experience is far too vivid and permanently recorded in the deepest recesses of my mind to have occurred when I was less than a year. I remember it like it was yesterday. So I don't know. I just don't see how I could have possibly been less than a year to remember it this well. So, what happened was my parents dropped my brother and me off at our grandparents for the weekend. The very first night we were there, actually within the first few hours of being dropped off, we ate dinner, and then we were sitting around the TV sitting around the TV in the living room, eating dessert. I elected for strawberry ice cream, and I was eating the ice cream, watching TV, and something made me laugh with a mouthful of ice cream. Little did I know there was an entire frozen strawberry in the middle of the bite. So when I laughed, I inhaled the entire frozen strawberry, which instantly got lodged into my windpipe. I wasn't laughing anymore. So I stood up, I put my hands up to my neck as to indicate I couldn't breathe or I'm choking, which I later found out is the international hand sign for "Hey, I'm choking." So that was pretty sweet. I remember something like immense pressure building up in my head, extreme pain throughout my lungs and then my entire body, and then everything just sort of went gray. I remember having a feeling of consciousness, so I was sort of conscious through this, although I was no longer in this world or in this body, and rather in a sort of a peaceful, gray, cloudy place, to be honest, with sort of an ambient music, maybe something you could say like very, very distant, faint sounds of like angels singing praises. That's what it sort of sounded like as best as I can remember. Now, although I don't remember much of what it was like for that approximately 30 seconds when my heart had stopped, but it seemed like a rather long time that I was out. From what I can recall, and I don't remember much detail, but it seemed like I was there for quite a while. And when I came to, when I was resuscitated, I didn't know where I was and didn't really remember anything. Now, what I do remember while I was out in this gray fog with no body, but my awareness was still there, was that there was no pain at all, really sort of the opposite of pain, almost like a feeling of complete ecstasy, to be honest. Meanwhile, my grandfather, who was a retired lieutenant colonel, World War II and Korean War veteran, dislodged the strawberry from my windpipe, gave me chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and I was actually revived before the ambulance got there. And they got there pretty quickly after I came to and still was trying to figure out where I was at. Now, one thing that I can tell you is that it was extremely painful to come back into the body from this spirit realm or whatever you want to call it. That's the best I can describe it. Uh, Again, while I was there, there was this sort of soft music, peace, and just a gray ambience and no worries, complete comfort. And so I could have easily been killed for good when I was very young, just sitting there eating a bowl of ice cream, but I was resuscitated, and the most painful thing of it was coming back. Now, I just want to make a point that that's how fragile our lives are. Yet many of us have delusions that death is always for some other people in the future or all the poor people in the past, when in fact, none of us, not one of us, never know what day may actually be our last. It really doesn't matter how careful you are, anything can happen. So that was in the early 80s. Let's just fast forward real quick to 2014 in October. Although, suffice to say that I indeed had many other occurrences throughout my life where I can honestly say I don't know how I survived, often without a scratch. But we'll just go to the last one, which was October of 2014. I was hit by a car while driving through a green light on my motorcycle. And I certainly would have been killed were it a nice day out that day, but I was lucky enough that it was a very nasty day. It was cold and raining, and so I was wearing, a full face mask and layers of jeans and leather to keep warm and keep out of the rain. Now, had it been a nice day, my face mask would have been off. I might have been wearing a t-shirt, and my face would have, and my chest would have cracked against the car's windshield without any protection, and I'd have been killed instantly for sure. So this accident, sort of, if you can imagine, without any insurance, and I did get a settlement, but it wasn't for much. Many months later. But this accident ruined my home-based business, which I had operated for about 4 years at the time. I was accustomed to making really good money every week, and after this accident, because I was a uh, small business owner, a subcontractor, I wouldn't qualify for any sort of disability insurance or anything like that. So, anyway, this whole accident ruined my home-based business, which I had for years. And although I have lost so much, really everything, in terms of material possessions since that accident, and continue to experience major tribulation since, I have gained in revelation of truth and evidence aligned to prove the creator of all things to a degree that I of certainty that to a degree of certainty that I never would have thought possible. So, okay, although I was an altar boy in an Orthodox church for many years growing up, I honestly thought the Christian Bible was illogical, and simply because it disagrees with the doctrines of modern science for which I've been deeply interested in and aligned to for my entire life. To this day, I'm honestly surprised that there are people out there who are really truly faithful to God and the teachings of Yeshua HaMashiach, or Jesus, yet are still under the thumb of the Great Deception. So, in other words, to me, their faith is really quite amazing in spite of the fact that they are still totally deceived. Now, the Great Deception, and I'm not going to get into this much in this video, you can check out some of my other stuff, but the Great Deception is, of course, scientism, heliocentrism, or essentially the Copernican principle governing the minds of the entire world, which essentially puts us in a place where we're nothing special, life is an accident, evolution is just sort of this freak thing that must happen all the time, as long as the correct, chemical situations are there, right? So anyway, my views on the validity of the Bible and really all ancient religious texts, but especially the Bible, which is what I grew up with, have since changed as a major revolution of truth has been poured out over me and many others over the last 2 years or so. Really washing away all sorts of deception that has literally been around for a long time, and lots of people are still deceived by it, don't even know that it's here, don't know that it's been here. They're on the lookout for it, right? A lot of people are on the lookout for it, not knowing that they are completely entrenched into the Great Deception. But this truth, this unveiling of deception has changed my life, and the lives of millions of others, in profound ways. Now, I know for 100% certain now that theoretical sciences are merely absurd conjecture, and my faith in the Almighty Creator and Christ His Son, God's Word made flesh, has taken root and grown immensely in my life over the past 2 years, in spite of a great deal of tribulation during this massive unveiling of the deception of scientism and heliocentrism, and ultimately anti-Christianism as the one false deceptive religion that has deceived the entire world. And this is the only such deception that I can think of, or anyone can think of, or anyone can even point to as remotely close to deceiving the entire world. Now, if you don't believe theoretical physics or scientism is a religion, then you're sadly mistaken, and I really urge you to research the topic, because there are so many holes in what theoretical physics claims to be laws that it's absolutely ridiculous, and evolution is included in this as well. And I'll give you that as one single example I'll cite to show self-evidence of a creator and disproof of modern theoretical physics is simply the existence of DNA code, which is so complex, perfect, and complete that it provides all the data necessary to automatically create natural, self-replicating sentient life forms out of simple materials. DNA code is barely understood by modern science. Of course, scientists posture themselves as godlike with a small g because they have mapped the human genome and can manipulate corn stalks to be naturally immune to poisonous pesticides, a la Monsanto and Roundup, just as one example. However, science cannot create a single seed from scratch, even with all their technology and vague understanding of DNA. So they can sort of tinker around and toy around with DNA and play with it a little bit, but they really could never create such a thing, could never even create a single seed from scratch. Now, a seed has many cells, but even a single-celled organism cannot be created by science. They are extremely complex, with millions of independent working parts, and of course billions of lines of DNA code, which simply could not have been penned into existence by accident or chance. And even a single-celled organism cannot be artificially created by science, and not for lack of trying. The existence of DNA code and the fact that you and I and everyone listening exists is rather obvious self-evidence of a supernatural divine creator who has indeed left his signature everywhere if you would simply care to look objectively. Now, unfortunately, the entire world has been living under the Great Deception, myself included, up to about 2 years ago, or maybe a little less than 2 years. However, this deception has been going on for a long time since we were all born, apparently for many hundreds of years. And I urge all of you guys to check out some of my documentary series playlists for more information about the revelation of the Great Deception that I'm talking about. And I hope you really, really give it some consideration because it is extremely important. So I'll put up a couple of links to a couple of playlists that should be very helpful to understand what I'm talking about. So with all that being said, my testimonial begins in June of 2016. So this is about 6 months ago as I record this. I was under tremendous stress that I can imagine many people out there are feeling all over the country and all over the world, especially. I was losing my home as my landlord had decided to end our lease agreement since the original 1 year lease term was up. We were on a month-to-month lease, and the landlord decided to end the lease, giving us a month notice to move when we had no intention or really means of doing so. I begged him to take my money for rent, and he refused, which technically is his legal right on a month-to-month lease, although typically this is considered extremely rare and unusual. It was getting to the point where we had about 2 weeks left at the house with really nowhere to go and no way to get there, trying to figure out what the heck are we going to do. Now, during this time, there was a period of about 4 days and 3 nights straight when I was simply unable to sleep. And again, this was during the middle of June 2016. I've tried to go back and remember exactly which date it is, but I believe it was somewhere during the middle of June 2016, and I'll explain a little bit why. But continuing, now, and I must make this disclaimer due to the millions of really hurtful and insulting, inconsiderate people out there who are going to accuse me of being on crack or heroin or something. No, I was sober. I just simply couldn't sleep for 4 days and 3 nights, and it was not for lack of wanting or trying. Not only was I under a lot of stress and trying to figure out where we're going to move and how we're going to pay for it, but there was just something else that was really bothering me, just something overwhelming me, and I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was just sort of this overwhelming, constant, unshakable sense of dread and literally physical pain, which I hadn't felt in over a year prior to that, since my accident. So I wanted to sleep so badly, and I was so terribly tired, yet when I closed my eyes, it was like this blinding white light would prevent me from even closing my eyes for more than a few seconds without really squinching to try to keep them closed. So, sleeping was impossible because it simply hurt, and it was like blinding to close my eyes. And this occurred, it was for like 90 hours until this was all said and done. Now, on the third evening of this really bizarre, overwhelming feeling of dread, disparity, uncertainty, sleeplessness, really, I wasn't able to stomach food, I wasn't able to eat. On that third evening, I was introduced just sort of by happenstance to this YouTube series, Dreams and Mysteries by the late John Paul Jackson. Now, the very first episode I saw of Dreams and Mysteries, the topic of the show was discussing blessing your land, walking the four corners of your property, introducing yourself to your land, taking command of your land, blessing the land and your home. And I realize that this sounds like a silly ritual. Trust me, I do. But it actually reminded me of something that I have done a few times in the past with our Orthodox priest when I was young. We actually blessed our land and our house with the priest when we moved to Central Florida from Virginia when I was a youngster. And I remember attending at least one or two other blessings of other people's homes while I was an altar boy, although I don't know how old I would have been. I would have been anywhere from 8 to 12. So, anyway, I was really quite moved by John Paul Jackson's explanation of this, taking authority of your land and maybe getting rid of curses, if you will, praying over your land, asking God to bless your home and land, commanding the land to align to the will of God. And more importantly, what this has reminded me, and something that I've felt for a long time, is that we do not need a priest to do this. I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions of modern institutionalized Christianity is that, for some reason people believe we need priests to connect with God, when in fact we all have the ability to communicate with our Creator through prayer, best spoken aloud and with absolute faith that God's will is done, regardless of our plans. Yet, he can show favor upon us and work with us, work miracles for us simply by willing them. But we must ask, we must have faith that he will reciprocate, and we may not see the results that we want when we want, but they say the Lord works in mysterious ways. I would say that the Lord works in very specific ways, yet we are not capable of seeing them, and so they're a mystery to us. But again, in order for miracles to happen for you, and sometimes miracles happen for people that never ask for them, of course, but in order for God to really work with you, you have to ask for it, and you have to have faith, and you have to live by the commandments of God. You have to live by the teachings of Jesus, and turn away or repent from sin and try to live by, the example of Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach. Now, this is a very humbling realization that there is actually a creator of all things, of the known earth and everything beyond. So it was getting late at night. It was in the evening. I think it may have been around 10 o'clock at night. And I went ahead and did this blessing of the land and house that very same evening. It was right after I saw that video. I was compelled to do this. And again, I was familiar with the process. There's really nothing much to it, honestly. But I was really quite desperate to try to, I was willing to try anything, because of this whole 4-day experience. And I really just wanted to sleep. And there was just this overwhelming air of despair really surrounding you could say my house or my life. It was really, really tough to deal with, and so I was desperate to try to end this awful 3-day long dread, is the best way I can put it. And of course, it certainly couldn't hurt, and something told me to just go ahead and do it, complete with anointing the four corners of the property outside and talking to the property and praying on your property, doing the same thing for all of the windows, walls, and doors inside, with the best and only oil in the house at the time. I actually used a very expensive coconut oil, which is not a brag. It was just the only oil we had in the house, and I was out of extra virgin olive oil, or I probably would have just used that. Even if I didn't have any oil, I would have maybe, scraped some oil off of my hands. I mean, we all secrete oil, but so anyway, I don't even know if you need oil. maybe, maybe not. It seems too bizarre and ritualistic to me, even to this day. I mean, honestly, I realize how strange it sounds, but again, it is an anointment. So, I will quickly mention that I am certainly no perfect angel. I've made many mistakes in my life, and it's really by the grace of the Creator that I'm still here on this plane. Now, after walking outside the property lines, getting ready to do this blessing and anointing of the corners, and then subsequently walk the interior of the house, blessing each door, wall, and window, commanding the land and property to align with the will of God and the kingdom of heaven. I've really tried and tried to find the specific episode of Dreams and Mysteries, which I saw that evening, that really ultimately reminded me of this process and compelled me to do such an admittedly bizarre thing. And for the life of me, I cannot find this episode. I looked and looked and looked. Anyway, if you guys aren't familiar with John Paul Jackson, check him out. Dreams and Mysteries is the YouTube channel, and he's got lots of sermons and stuff that he's done you can find online. He did die fairly recently, I believe, of cancer, so rest in peace for him. Anyway, it's almost as if the specific episode I'm looking for had been removed from the Dreams and Mysteries YouTube page, as I'm making this video, as I've pretty much checked every single video on there, and I cannot find the one that I saw that third evening, so that's kind of strange, but maybe I'm just not finding it, whatever. So as I was doing this blessing of the property and house alone at night, it was very quiet. I lived in a very quiet neighborhood, so I felt a bit embarrassed at first, to be very honest. Speaking out loud to the land and the grass in my front yard and the stream in the backyard and the windows and the walls and the doors of the house. But, as I decided to do it and went outside to the first corner and blessed, ultimately the entire property, anointing it with oil, I had this overwhelming sense of relief before I reached even the second corner of the property, which is like, 5 minutes into this thing. It was like a weight was lifted from my shoulders, and sort of an electric force charged through my body, gave me chills all over. This electric force coming straight from the ether, and it really relieved much of the anxiety and overall dread that I had been feeling for those last 3 days. And, I literally had some tears, which I usually do not do. Unless someone close to me or like a pet dies, I don't cry. I just don't. Now, whether you believe me or not, the air in the home after this process, as bizarre as it seems, it felt different. And I felt like a million times better, but I was still feeling, this slight dread, and I was still dealing with, facing having to move and really my life crashing in around me. But I went ahead and tried to lay down in bed and go to sleep. So the weather was perfect for sleeping with the windows open during the evenings in June. This was in South Carolina, and so the days were hot, but the evenings were really nice and cool and crisp. And so our neighborhood is always, that neighborhood was always very quiet at night. And the stream behind the house and the crickets would often help me, get to sleep. It was very peaceful. And indeed, it was an especially very still, peaceful night that night. And I felt much better, rejuvenated even. I was able to close my eyes without that sort of blinding light preventing me from closing them. That was gone. But still, I couldn't sleep. For some reason, I was unable to sleep still. Even, I could close my eyes and relax. I just, laid there a couple hours and couldn't sleep. So the experience that I just had by faithfully, putting my faith in God, faithfully taking authority over the small bit of land in my little home actually made the stressful energy I'd been dealing with almost evaporate completely. The air felt different, the charge of the house felt different, but I still couldn't sleep, even though I was extremely exhausted and wanted to sleep very, very badly. And that's not like me. Usually I can go straight to sleep, so this was a very odd situation. Now, one thing that I will do if there are times if I'm having trouble sleeping or if I want to go to sleep quickly, are specific breathing exercises that I learned from my aunt, who is a yoga instructor, has been for many years. Now, I'm certainly no yoga expert, nor do I adhere to the, Brahma-related religions or any of that stuff by any means. However, I have gotten rather good with a very basic breathing exercise that I really think that everyone ought to do at least once per day, or at least once per week, or maybe once in a while, especially if you don't do much cardio, or if you're a smoker, or if you suffer from upper or lower respiratory problems. I don't want to give anyone bad medical advice, as I'm no doctor or yoga instructor, but the essential practice is to, so it's nothing major, it's to slowly, naturally breathe completely in and out, without forcing it, finding a rhythm similar to the ebb and flow of the splashing waves at the ocean. So the basic level of this, again, is really simple as fully breathing. Now, most people, especially Americans, aren't aware of this, but the majority of people, especially those who are not physically active, which is most Americans are not physically active, simply do not fully breathe in and out almost ever. Now, what this causes is the lower section of your lungs will become stale with carbon dioxide, and this will actually lower your energy levels. Though there's actually all sorts of problems you can get from this. Our physiological digestive process, for example, is often likened to a slow burning fire, and it's essentially the same process that goes on when you digest food and convert it to energy. It's the same process that goes on when you stick a log on the fire. That's how we derive our energy from food. That's why they call it burning calories, right? So just like any fire, you need oxygen. And if you're simply never expelling the complete contents of your lungs, you are literally slow poisoning yourself and sapping your own energy levels. This simple breathing exercise, if done properly under minor instruction, I would recommend, for at least 20 or 30 minutes a day, can really improve your energy levels and stamina. It helps you to relax, helps you to digest, helps you to clear your head, helps you to think. There's lots of benefits to this, and no sort of worship stuff and no sort of I'm a god and you're a god stuff involved. We're just simply talking about breathing exercise that come from yoga practices. So, um, I'm not sitting here saying anything but we're talking about properly breathing. So it is that simple, and it doesn't go any further than that for me. Many people take this stuff to extremely bizarre levels, which I'm not going to get into. But anyway, the idea of this whole breathing exercise is to completely naturally, without forcing, just fully fill your lungs with air. Then, as I stated, with sort of finding the rhythm of the waves ebbing and flowing at the edge of the sea, exhale all of the contents of your lungs. And you sort of have to build up to it. Now, this may seem kind of silly, but you actually must consciously train yourself how to completely expel all of the air from your lungs naturally, again, without forcing it or hurting yourself. But expelling all of that air from your lungs is something that you, if you're an average American, do not know how to do, especially if you don't do much cardio. So naturally, once you've done it a couple of times, you sort of have to train yourself to do it. But it becomes more and more natural, and eventually, even within just maybe 20 minutes, you don't even need to think about it. But the key is to do this continually for at least 20 to 30 minutes. And you might need to start with 5 minutes if your lungs are in bad shape, or really, you just don't want to go. You got to learn how to crawl before you walk. So maybe it's good to build up to this in small doses. But like I said, I've been doing this particular breathing exercise and getting into some complex variants of it over the years. Pace yourself, and again, I would recommend maybe just getting some minor instruction, or maybe watching some videos about basic yoga breathing exercises that you can do. One thing I'll mention, it is important to lay flat on your back for this particular exercise in a relaxed position and breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth as a rule. Now, this process of simply breathing properly can be extremely relaxing, and rejuvenating your lungs with a good dose of fresh air from the open window. It can really help you sleep once you've done a 20 or 30-minute breathing exercise. But that isn't what happened for me that night. What happened, it was, as I started my breathing exercise, slowly at first, because again, even if you do this all the time, you sort of need to build up to this full inhalation and exhalation. You can't just start out at 100%. And but as I started getting into this, I began to hear what sounded like a vortex of air directly above my house. At first, I thought it was me wheezing because the sound seemed to be in direct unity with my breathing. So I stopped for a moment and listened, and the vortex sound sort of died off. And I'm like, okay, yeah, it must have been me wheezing. Tried to clear my throat. There wasn't anything in there, but okay. So I thought it was strange, and I continued with the breathing exercise. And my lungs were already a bit warmed up, so I got into about a medium zone fairly quickly. And by medium zone, I'm talking about, my maximum lung capacity in to completely expelled lungs, which is very, very important in cleansing, by the way. So I got into a medium zone very quickly, and immediately the sound of this vortex, or after about 5 or 6 breaths, the sound of this vortex, which was clearly coming from outside the window, maybe a couple 100 feet above the house, returned. And at this point, I assumed it was a coincidence. Maybe we're in for some bad weather, even though, again, it was an extremely still night, and it's always a quiet neighborhood, and it was the middle of June. Just a very nice, cool night. And so anyway, I assumed this was a coincidence. Took the breathing exercises back within a few minutes to full-on maximum 100%. Now, at this point, the vortex was obviously attuned and in sync with my breathing, as if my lungs were either in control of, or maybe more probably, my lungs were being controlled by this vortex itself. Now, I didn't see a vortex, but I did hear the vortex, and it was kind of strange because as I breathed in completely, the vortex sound would seem to raise high in altitude and by many feet, instantly gaining in pitch, lowering in volume as if it was really speeding up and raising up hundreds of feet as sort of an inverted tornado directly above my house. And again, I tried to wake my wife up and she would not wake up. And this is really weird. This doesn't happen, right? So as I exhaled slowly and deliberately, the vortex seemed to lower its pitch and altitude. However, it seemed to pick up power in terms of circumference and sort of a lower rumble, and the trees around the outside of my window would begin stirring drastically. And then I would, completely exhale, hold that exhaled breath for a good 5 seconds, and this vortex would remain surrounding me and low to the ground with a low frequency rumble. And then finally I would breathe in, and as soon as I would breathe in, every single time, the vortex would raise many hundreds of feet. It would raise in pitch and raise in altitude, right? And so it kind of freaked me out a little bit here. So after about 10 minutes of this, and it never failed. I mean, I tried different variants of, the rhythm of my breathing, holding out my exhale for as long as possible. And it seemed like when I did that, when I breathed in, the vortex continued to just exponentially gain in strength. I mean, it started becoming extremely loud. When it would gain in altitude, it seemed to go higher, yet it would get even louder and a higher pitch. And after about 10 minutes of this, I just completely stopped the exercise, and immediately, within 5 seconds, the vortex sort of fizzled away, although I could still hear it whizzing, maybe 300 feet above my house. Now, at that point, I heard what sounded like an extremely large bird. And I'm not talking a hawk, I'm talking about it sounded like a bird that might have been 10 or 12 feet tall. I can't describe it, I'm not going to try to mimic it. If I tried, it wouldn't do it justice. But the sound of this bird seemed to be coming from the creek behind my house, which was just behind my house. I could walk to the creek in 50 paces. Just sounded like maybe a few meters down the creek from my window. So I sort of looked out my window and looked for it, didn't see anything, and I was compelled to put on my slippers and walk around to the creek. And the air, this sort of surprised me because I was expecting it to be nasty weather because I'm still sort of thinking that, this whole thing's in my head. But the air was very calm. There was no vortex. There was no sign of a giant bird. And I did, kind of trudge through the mud a little bit towards the direction that I heard it, and I didn't see anything. So I, came back inside, took my shoes off, laid down, and I was really beside myself about the whole thing. And I thought, I must just be going crazy. This is a lack of sleep. These are the thoughts that are going through my mind. But honestly, I felt rested, even though I hadn't slept. I felt rested because of, what I have sort of already told you. Um, those sort of breathing exercises can actually make you feel rested. So anyway, I had to be sure about this, and I went straight into 100% breathing exercise mode, maybe even 150%, almost as soon as I lay down. And by the second breath in, this vortex returned just as it had before. And again, I never saw the vortex, I heard it, and I also saw the trees rumbling as I would exhale, especially holding in my exhale breath for as long as possible. But I never saw any sort of tornado or anything, so don't misquote me on that. But yeah, by the second breath, after walking around in the, near the creek, getting a little muddy, laid down and second breath in, the vortex returned just as before, and it was just as powerful. Now, I want to quickly mention again that my wife is not a sound sleeper. I mean, she'll wake up if I make the smallest noise, but she was asleep for this entire ordeal, and I even tried to wake her at times, nudge her a little bit, shook her a little bit, and she just simply would not wake up. She told me of some really wild dreams that she had the next day, but that's besides the point. Now, at this point, I was just in awe of the power that was not coming from me. Please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying this power was coming from me, but it was power that was passing through me, coming from a source that was far superior to anything that I've ever encountered, honestly, which was apparent by this whistling vortex with every inhale and crashing vortex with every exhale. To me, this was sort of an answer to one of my prayers, which has always been uh, for God to prove Himself to me to help me with my faith. Which is not a bad thing to pray for, because there's a lot of Christians out there who are just struggling with faith because I mean, we've really been indoctrinated with a great deal of deception our entire lives. It is difficult to hold faith in ancient scripture, and that's really regardless of what religion you're in, but especially Christianity is being attacked for some reason, and I'll leave that up to the discernment of the viewer as to why. But I started experimenting with the limits of my breathing, as I have always been rather thoracic. I've always had big lungs, whatever. And I was to the point where I was doing this like 200% that I'd ever done in my life. I was, holding my exhale breaths for much longer than probably safe or necessary, which would keep the vortex down and around and sort of under the ground and stirring the trees around the house. And when I did this, when I would, completely exhale and hold it, it seemed to increase the kinetic energy of the next inhale, which would send the vortex even higher and stronger than before. I mean, this got extremely, extremely powerful to the point to where, I mean, this sounds so crazy, but there were just literally what I can only describe to be some sort of spiritual, colorful weapons zipping out of the ground like fireworks. And I'll touch on that in a minute. I know how crazy this sounds. It's ridiculous. Now, I've been doing these such exercises since I was about 10 years old, on and off. And I've honestly never gotten to the level that I was at during this ordeal. I could easily do 100% breathing in and 100% breathing out, but this was to the point to more, after about 15 minutes of extreme 150 or 200% breathing, I was to the point to where I could exhale 4 breaths after one inhale and then hold my breath with no air in it for up to like a minute, just testing my sanity to see if this vortex was actually in sync with my breathing. And again, it could have been my breathing that was in sync with the vortex. I still, I don't know. The vortex, which remained directly above my house, varying in altitude and kinetic energy, in lockstep with my breathing, was just something I have never experienced, and something that I wouldn't believe somebody if they told me this, honestly. So if you're skeptical, I totally understand. It was apparent that there was a power building so great, and I was obviously not in control of it, nor would I want to wield such a power. But instead, this was a great power that was just partially moving through me, as if I were a mere portion of a small conduit of something much larger and powerful than myself. It was very humbling. Then I heard this strange call, as I was doing this. I heard this strange call from the same large bird, from the same direction as before, through the window. Now, I should tell you that I'd lived in that home for about a year and a half, and I had never heard such a bird in the neighborhood. Honestly, I've never heard such a bird in my entire life. And I've lived in a lot of places. I've never heard a bird like this. I mean, it sounded like a 12-foot tall bird. Um, that's how it sounded. I can't describe it. It would be impossible to describe. But whatever it was big, and it sounded like a bird. So the calls that it made had no lingual meaning, obviously, but it was if the messages that it were offering me, I was sort of understanding the messages, as strange as that sound, and they were reassuring that, I and my family were completely safe, and letting me know that forces were on the way, so be prepared. And I had no idea what I was about to experience. I thought that, this was the craziest thing I'd ever seen before, but whew, I had no idea what I was about to experience. So this entire time, and at this point, I don't know if it had been maybe an hour or a couple hours, but I continued with my 150% lung capacity breathing. Again, which I've never done this as aggressively or as properly, I guess you could say, ever in my life. Now, I heard what sounded like an extremely distant trumpet, and it seemed to come from sort of all directions, but from one specific direction. And if I was looking out my window, the creek was about 50 paces down, and it would be up into the sky and off to the right. I don't remember which direction that was. I think it was from the east, but I'm not sure. So anyway, immediately after the trumpet, or what really sort of sounded like a shofar, I think that's what you call it, but trumpet, it was an instrument that I've never heard before, and I've heard lots of instruments. I majored in guitar, and I've been, a musician. I started playing piano when I was 8, and guitar when I was 11, and I, took music classes my whole life, and I've never heard such a horn. But it was extremely faint and distant, but it was also extremely powerful. That was obvious. Now, immediately after I heard that trumpet, and immediately after I heard that trumpet, I heard the very faint and distant sound of distinctly war drums and marching. And this is coming off in the distance, and it wasn't coming from the ground or from the mountain. It was coming from the sky, way above this vortex that continued this entire time. Now, these sounds were coming from the sky, obviously. Although they were faint and distant, they were obviously very loud and powerful. Now, within another 10 minutes, more horns were sounded, and they sounded closer, and they sounded louder, they sounded more powerful, and the sound of the war drums coming from the sky were unmistakable. These were getting so loud that they were shaking my windows. Now, starting at this point, I realized that about every 5 minutes I heard people from all over the neighborhood, one after another, not all at once. Actually, there was like maybe three at once and then one, but people all over the neighborhood were slamming their doors, getting in their cars, and peeling out and just leaving. Because I lived in a really highly populated area. There were lots of little neighborhoods around, and it is a very, very quiet area. And yeah, people were, getting in their cars, slamming their doors, and peeling off and leaving. And this was like 3 a.m. on, I believe, a Tuesday. So, typically you would not hear this in my neighborhood at all. Again, I'd lived there for years, and I'd never heard anything like that. So this led me to believe, this sort of reassured me that I wasn't the only one hearing these things and, trumpets and war drums and what sounds like giants marching across the sky and this vortex that appears to be an inverted tornado that you can't see. Really, really bizarre stuff. I know this sounds crazy. Now, this vortex continued to ebb and flow in lockstep with my breathing, never missing a beat. No matter what I did, it was in sync with my breathing. Or again, my breathing was compelled to ebb and flow with the vortex. I really don't know which. However, as one line of marching giants in the sky, it's the best way I can put it. And again, I only heard this, I didn't see it. But as one line of marching angels went past and trailed off into the distance, another one would come from the same distance right behind them, from the same direction, from the same distance, and passing in the same direction. And they each had their own nuances in terms of the sounds of the war drums and the songs that they were playing and the hymns that they were singing. Cars in the surrounding neighborhoods continued to slam their doors and peel off into the night all night as this happened. Now, this experience was reaching a fever pitch as the lines of whatever these things were marching through the sky were continual. So no longer was it just one distant trumpet coming across, then another distant trumpet coming across. It was row upon row upon row for hours of these, I don't know what you call them, extremely powerful beings marching through the sky. I would call it the army of God. Honestly, that's the only way I can put it. Now, as this experience was reaching a fever pitch, that bird or messenger returned very frequently and promptly, almost on a schedule. It was like every 15 or 30 minutes, and as crazy as this seems, it was apparently reporting in statistics of a spiritual battle that was being waged that night, and that the army of God had had 0 casualties, and the enemies of God were being defeated on every front. And I was continually offered reassurance that our home and many others around us were safe, and in fact that many others around us would sleep through this and never know it happened. Those who were in fear of this were leaving for some reason, and I don't know what that reason was, but others were completely sheltered and unaware of it. Now, this process continued for at least another hour, this fever pitch process, where there was just this constant rumbling of war drums and different types of callings coming from what seemed to be great generals of the armies of God. They were literally calling out commands, and I was continually offered reassurance that our home and many others around us were safe by this messenger that was coming to the creek behind my house periodically. This process continued for hours, or the fever pitch process continued for at least an hour, and I was simply unable to stop this. Now I was up to like 200% of lung capacity breathing exercise. I couldn't stop if I wanted to, which is sort of what led me to believe that I was in absolutely no control over this, nor would I want control over something so powerful. I was merely, just a small portion of this power was sort of passing through me, is the best way I can put it. Now, during the middle of all this, during this fever pitch, I could hear the ground beneath my house sound like it was opening up. And during each inhale, undiscernible patterns of colors, which sounded like giant spinning rockets shooting up towards the vortex above my home and off into some direction. They all went in different directions. One would go east, one would go north, one would go west, but it was always on a super inhale. But these, whatever they were traveling miles away, maybe hundreds of miles away instantly, who knows. They were colorful, powerful, whatever they were being hurled into the sky. And I was relayed by the visiting messenger that these weapons, whatever they were being directed at entities controlling those who represent spiritual wickedness in high places, if you're familiar with the verse. Now, I realize how crazy this sounds, but I promise all of you that this happened as I was wide awake. More than wide awake. I mean, my senses were so heightened that I was simply unable to miss a single moment of this. And the process of what I believe to be the line after line of marching angels of God entered into our realm and were waging a war that was not of this world, but beyond the veil of our capability to understand. And I was just simply being answered a prayer, and that prayer was to show me a sign to increase my faith. That I pray for a lot because, again, I have struggled with faith my entire life. And I'm here to tell you that faith is extremely powerful. The vortex and my breathing became more and more powerful, and the only way that I can describe it was going on was the world itself was breathing through me, almost, tearing me apart. And some secret ancient power locked deep within the belly of the earth was being unlocked. And the messengers of God revealed this to me as a personal assurance that the wickedness of this world that we're all very familiar with is no match for the Creator or even the lowliest of His angels. Now, I was under the impression that the Creator of this world, the one true God Almighty, could defeat all wickedness in this world with a single breath or a single word or a single thought by this just vulgar, beautiful display of power that humbled me to the degree I would have been extremely afraid had it not been for the reassurances of that messenger. Now, I also got the impression that our faith and awe and worship of the Creator is growing against the tyranny of the wicked rulers of this world, despite every attempt of the modern culture to drive people away from faith in God or faith in a creator. Line after line of what sounded like giant armies of angels continued to pass above my home, the vortex continuing exactly as it did at 200%, all coming from one direction and passing across the sky in the same direction. And again, I was wide awake for this entire ordeal. I simply couldn't believe that my wife wouldn't wake up for this. Even when I shook her and nudged her, she just would not wake up. Now, the faithful messenger I had never heard before or since seemed to be traveling to distant points and returning with reports every 15 minutes or so. And again, I know how crazy this sounds. I didn't understand the birds' noises, but it gave me understanding. That's the only way I can put it. But if you had heard or seen any of this, you would be compelled to share it, I promise. And I don't care who thinks I'm crazy. I don't care. Victory after victory, in terms of this army of God, was related to me, and an assurance that God's justice is complete, fair, and good. That was really the ultimate message, and that we were safe. Really, only the wicked and this spiritual wickedness in high places are on the wrong end of this seemingly endless army of millions and millions of just awesome soldiers of God, I guess is the best way to put it. Marching through the heavens, blowing trumpets and drumming war drums. The constant deafening war drums continuously crossing over through the vortex, which seemed to offer protection as well as power, either to myself or to this encounter, to this experience that I was having. But it became deafening, these the marches of rows and rows of war drums and trumpets and jubilees of what appeared to be spiritual weapons zipping up out of the ground and instantly traveling out of sight. uh, During none of this, after the first couple hours, I was no longer frightened at all. But half of the neighborhood apparently was, because literally from all directions, and I know I've said this a couple times, but as this experience grew to a fever pitch and continued and was not relenting, people all around, I heard it for hours, every 5 minutes, every 10 minutes, 3 or 4 people were just getting in their cars and peeling off the heck out of town from all directions within earshot. Now, I had been doing this breathing exercise for at least a few hours, and the vortex continued to grow in power. The trumpets, war drums, and marching lines of God's army continued to pass over, and the neighbors continued peeling off out of their driveways and screeching off into the distance. As this continued on, I began to have some, I guess you could say, visions, although I was wide awake and my eyes were open. I was just having visions, and people say, "Oh, you were tripping." Well, we all have a pineal gland. Your pineal gland is called your third eye. It has a cornea, a retina, and is attached to the brain by something similar to the optic nerve. So it is literally an eyeball inside your brain. So having visions is something very natural, and when we have dreams, we have sort of visions, but I wasn't asleep. But I was having sort of waking visions or impressions of things that I really find it hard to recall or describe. That may be a whole nother testimonial in itself, and honestly, I don't think I could describe what I had seen. But it wasn't all reassuring. Some of it was rather frightening. Some of it was very reassuring. But those few visions are not the crux of this testimonial. And by the way, no, I'm not psychotic, and no, I don't have visions. And I've done these sort of breathing exercises my whole life and never had visions. This was the first of all sorts of things for me. But the point is I wasn't asleep. I was having waking visions of things that I just really can't describe at this point. I don't even know I could if I tried. But I believe I was shown a glimpse of how God created the entire world, and that there are secrets beneath the surface that we're completely unaware of. Remember, in the heliocentric model, they say that we live wrapped around a ball of molten lava. That makes perfect sense because we all know how molten lava makes for an excellent structural material, right? Anyway, God could rejuvenate this world and rid it of wickedness simply by willing it or speaking it. However, I believe that he wants more people to come to have faith in the world before ending this civilization. Or, more people in the world to have faith in God before ending the civilization. So I think that, I don't know, this may be, out of line, but I believe we're living on borrowed time. And I think that, God doesn't want to see all the millions of atheist people who've been deceived wind up, in big trouble for everlasting life. And as crazy as that may sound to people, what have you got to lose? I mean, if you're right, atheists, if you're right, and when you die, there's nothing, there's no afterlife, then it doesn't matter how you live on this world. On the other hand, if we're right, and there is everlasting life, then what you do on this world holds huge implications for your eternal soul. Now, I've long realized that America, or this is, my belief, that America is indeed Mystery Babylon itself, spoken of in Revelation, and we are indeed going to face terrible war and tribulation, maybe within our lifetimes, maybe tomorrow, maybe in 100 years. But the signs are all sort of coming to pass. I was given the impression, though, that God did not want to destroy the world as we know it, as unlike Sodom and Gomorrah, God is thankfully able to find at least 20 good people in America. probably millions, but at least 20, right? I'm trying to have a little humor here. If you're familiar with the story of Lot and his exit from Sodom. Now, I was assured that there is an extremely simple salvation for all of us, and our Creator wants us all to enjoy the place He has prepared for us beyond this realm. But time is running short, and we must warn others, and we must spread the good news to others. This is honestly the reason I've decided to share this testimony. And believe me, I've had my hesitations simply because I feel that many people will not believe me and that I will lose my credibility in terms of other work that I've done in the past. And to me, this is now irrelevant as I want to help as many people as possible to understand that it's not embarrassing to look into things that disagree with science. It's not embarrassing to look into Christian philosophy, or at least the teachings of Christ himself, if you can research at least that. Now, in terms of the, losing credibility because of this, it's irrelevant because I want to help as many people understand that it's not too late for you to realize the truth. And give credit where credit's due to the Almighty Creator who gave us all a home, which is the earth, and life, which is this mystery that we're still trying to figure out. And every blessing or miracle you've experienced, whether you know it or believe it or not, that was God looking out for you as He loves all of His children and wants us to be saved from eternal or everlasting damnation. I have honestly not done the approximately 5 to 8 hour experience any justice with this testimony, as there was just too much physical and audible information to describe or even remember, and the stuff or cover, and the stuff that I remember, I don't think that I could describe. Just some things are beyond description, honestly. Colors I've never seen, for example, permanent vortex above my house in sync with my breathing, right? The sounds of the earth beneath my home, unlocking some ancient force created to protect the righteous and punish the wicked. To me, it appeared that this was just one of many such conduits that are sort of hidden beneath the earth. Because remember, the deepest, and I mentioned about the whole lava thing being the center of a spinning ball earth, but in reality, the deepest people have ever drilled is about 8 miles. So we really don't know what God's got hidden underneath the earth that He created for us. This experience was so humbling, spiritually moving, and uplifting, and yet extremely terrifying at the same time. I was given the impression that the visiting messenger, which I never did see and only heard, and I really can't describe the sound, was either the Archangel Gabriel, although I was told by someone I spoke with about this that it may have been the Archangel Michael. So these are obviously English names given to the highest servants and messengers of God who sang as God created the heavens and the earth, and constantly sing praises to His name, and protect this realm. By the way, I forgot to mention this, along with probably a million other things, but in between the lines of the armies of God, what were apparently, armies of angels, there were these lines of angels constantly singing different praises to God, and it was eerily similar to what I heard when I was briefly dead when I was very young. It reminded me of that. I had honestly forgotten about that incident when I was very young until relatively recently. Now, I was so overwhelmed by this whole experience, although it was so awesome, I didn't want to stop. I had never felt the presence of God so strongly ever, and this was an answer to many of my prayers in order to help me to increase my faith. But the fact was I couldn't stop until the last of the war drums finally ebbed out off into the distance and the final shofar was blown. My breathing, slowed, and the vortex died down, and the final trumpet off in the distance declared victory. and I heard a final call from the messenger out the window, whichever angel it was. After warming down my breathing, returned to my regular, shallow, sort of sleep mode breathing. I felt extremely relaxed, rejuvenated, although I could actually taste blood coming up through my throat, as my lungs are simply not used to, or probably not even capable of, the amount and duration of 200% complete, inhalation and exhalation breathing exercise. Now, I prayed for peace rather than war, and was given the understanding that war is upon us, although we have a choice as to which side we're on, and there's clearly going to be one winner and one extreme loser. The winner is going to be the one who created everything, not the one who runs this world in terms of the evil corporations and the evil governments, right? So, and the evil hierarchical religious structures, for that matter. Now, those of us who decide to deny the Creator as a result of the Great Deception or scientism in 99% of the cases, and mock or ridicule God or even Christians trying to help them to have a chance, this is a foolish thing to do, and I hate to use that word, but it is. Now, the Christians or Catholics who have been led astray and deceived by false doctrines of their preachers and mistranslations that are found all throughout the King James Bible still have a chance to understand the purpose of Jesus' life and to live by his word and teachings rather than by the doctrines and apostate churches' festivals. Now, this may come as a huge shock to many people, and Christians will probably disagree with me, but I'm here to testify that we are not to worship Jesus Christ, especially an idol hanging from the cross. We can have a personal relationship with the Son of God, who is a direct conduit and the only road and path to the Creator of all things. But a few Bible passages mention to worship no man, and I'll give you a couple examples. Luke 4:8 is essentially Jesus telling Satan that he would worship no man, but only God the Father and the Creator. And here's the direct quote: "And Jesus answered and said unto him, Get thee behind me, Satan, for it is written, Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve." Another example is Romans 1:23. Essentially states that we should not worship anything but God. However, we people are prone to worshiping the creation rather than the Creator. And the quote is, "And change the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like unto corruptible man, and to birds, and to four-footed beasts, and creeping things." End quote. Finally, I'll say this one without quoting passage, but Jesus' ultimate message, to me at least, is that Christ is the only path to God and will sit at the right hand of the Father on Judgment Day. Now, I don't want to get into semantic debates, but I don't see how Jesus can be the one and only Son of God and the only path to God and be synonymous with God. Now, I realize that this is an argument in semantics, but I really just think that we need to tread carefully when worshiping a man, especially in the sense of the Roman Catholic Church, when worshiping and kneeling to a cross with an effigy of the tortured and murdered Jesus Christ. Now, I personally see the Roman Catholic Church worshiping unto idols, especially of a gruesome depiction of the crucifixion, which may have been the final work of Christ, indeed, redeeming us from sin if only we accept him as the true Son of God. The crucifixion is obviously an important lesson, but I feel that we should be more impressed with the resurrection as opposed to dwelling on the horrible torture and crucifixion, teaching us, and I think that Christ was teaching his disciples, especially the doubting Thomas types, that he was showing us that the body is a mere shell or a wineskin that we shed, and that through the grace of God and sacrifice of Christ, all us poor sinners have a chance of redemption, to have our names written in the book of life, to be given new bodies, and to become God's chosen people to inherit a new earth, new bodies, as opposed to being cast into the bottomless pit until the day of our judgment. Now, if you don't have faith in God, then you probably have faith in either science and or money. If you fear things that may come to you under any scenario, then I'm here to tell you that fear is the opposite of faith. Faith is the unshakable belief that good things will come to you should you simply ask with a faithful heart, while fear is the unshakable belief that bad things will come to you no matter how you try to avoid it. So, fear and faith are really the exact same thing, however, with two completely different outcomes. Again, fear being sure that something bad's going to happen, and faith being sure that something good is going to happen. So for me, having faith in God was always very difficult my entire life. I've lived a pretty rough life, honestly, until I came into the revelation during the middle of 2015 that the creation account in Genesis is actually accurate and the heliocentric infinite space Big Bang model is hogwash. Prior to this, I did have faith in a creator. However, it was backburned for rational scientific proof that the Bible was all sorts of wrong according to my deceived self. Now, knowing the truth that the Bible was scientifically correct about at least the creation of a fixed and immovable world, it has led me to revisit the Bible, especially biblical prophecy, which is uncannily coming to pass all over the world. The mark of the beast implanted into your right hand or forehead is being rolled out all over the place. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but even American citizens are being unknowingly implanted with RFID microchips, especially those who are under the specific Obamacare health plans, from what I gather. And I do think that further research is warranted on this. Now, again, I'm not going to present evidence for that in this testimony, but I will urge you to research the topic. Honestly, how could people 2,000 years ago know that we'd be dealing with such a mark, you know, that will be the only way to buy, sell, or trade at this specific point in history while so many of these other prophecies are fulfilled? And I was about to say predictions, but I want to make this distinction real quick. Predictions are predictions. 2012 was a prediction. Y2K was a prediction, and none of them came to pass. The difference between a prediction and a prophecy is that a prophecy comes to pass, and we've just seen too many biblical prophecies come to pass to shake them off as coincidence. So I just wanted to point that out. One example would be earthquakes and volcanoes in diverse places. 1/3 of the fish of the sea dying, and we've seen lots of fish die-offs here lately. The water's being poisoned, that's certainly happening. The sky's being poisoned. I remember one passage or one prediction about plants that will bear no seeds, and again we get that a la Monsanto. With their Roundup Ready corn to make sure they can poison the corn and poison us, but the corn does fine. We're not Roundup Ready though, are we, guys? Right? So this extremely ancient foreknowledge of the Great Deception, and I'm explicitly talking about scientism and heliocentrism and Big Bangism and Copernican principalism, all of this which has fooled the entire world. The foreknowledge of this Great Deception, to me, is evidence enough that the biblical prophecies are not mere predictions. The triplicate 666 connection to the globe Earth model doesn't hurt either. Of course, if you want to figure up the vertical droppage due to curvature, you multiply the distance in miles squared times 0.666 to get your expected vertical drop in curvature in feet. The Earth allegedly orbits the Sun at 666 miles per hour. And of course, the tilt of the Earth is 23.4 degrees off the 90-degree, vertical axis, which is 66.6 degrees off the horizontal axis. So, to me, the Great Deception certainly involves scientism and heliocentrism almost exclusively. There's nothing else in history I can point to that has fooled the entire world. Right. Now, during the end days, men will deem themselves wise, but will be fools in the eyes of God, worshiping themselves and their foolish knowledge, replacing the Creator with science and money. Okay, so let me be clear. I'm not claiming to be anything special. I'm just a single, simple man. I don't believe I have special powers, and the incident that night in the middle of June 2016 was literally an answer to my prayers. I had been praying to God for peace and begging Him to help me with my faith, which was lacking at the time due to some of the circumstances that I had mentioned, in the background of this video. Now, after this experience, I realize without a doubt that whether or not the King James Version is an accurate translation of the original Bible verbatim, there is indeed a creator of all things who knows and loves all of us, yet gave us all free will to choose a side. The great deception of scientism and heliocentrism has brought so many people away from the idea or faith in a creator that at the rate we're going, in another generation, there will be no more understanding or relationship with God, except for maybe a few people who would be, hunted down and killed. Now, I've never had a fear of my own death, especially after the brush with death I had when I was very young. However, after this experience, I almost longed for death at times. I would never hurt myself, but when my time comes, whether it's today or in 20 years, I'm prepared to meet my Maker, and I pray that He knows my name and accepts my repentance for all of the things I've done in my life. The past few years have completely changed my outlook on the world and the idea of a creator, and again, I'm convinced that the evidence is all there to prove a creator in spades and a grand designer. However, the religion of scientism prevents most people from considering the premises, even considering the premises, that contradict the godless, random, gravity-based, infinite-spaced hypothesis, which is governed by chaos. Anyway, as I was relaxing, I received one final report from the messenger, which again called me crazy. I believe it was either Gabriel or Michael. Maybe it was another one. I don't know. That whatever their mission was that evening had been accomplished, and that no casualties were suffered by the armies of God, yet every battle that had gone on that night spiritually was a complete success. And never heard from that messenger before or since. Never heard such a bird call ever in my life or ever since. Now, I know there are a lot of atheists out there who will chalk this up as me being a lunatic or a liar. However, I would never lie about such a thing. I have my mental, faculties about me. Especially, considering how embarrassing this is for me to talk about. I mean, honestly, I get it. I wouldn't believe it if someone else told me this story, but I still have to tell it again, if just to help one single person reconsider the theology, even if it's at the expense of every last one of my subscribers. So, if you are an atheist, I would really like you to consider two things. One, what created the universe? And two, what created DNA code? If you're honest with yourself, the Big Bang Theory does not adequately account for the former, and random chance does not account for the latter. The fact that so many unforeseeable prophecies from thousands of years past have indeed come to pass and continue to come to pass at alarming rates should at least pique the interest of an atheist who has never read the good news. Furthermore, I know a lot of Catholics who have extremely superficial faith, if not no faith, or belief in that religion of Catholicism, which again is Holy Roman Empirism, and for good reason, so I understand why. I have concluded through research, evidence, and prophecy that the Vatican itself is a part of the beast system, if not the head of the beast system that was warned to us in Revelation. Or maybe the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon. I'll leave it up to the viewer to research this, although I do have some videos covering the despicable forgery of Christianity that is Roman Catholicism, although that is not my typical subject matter. But by extension, even the so-called modern-day Protestant churches are following in step with the Roman Catholic Church, which is very frightening. A lot of Protestants don't know what it means to be Protestant, but it literally means to protest and go against the Roman Catholic Church, and yet here they are getting married to each other. So it's That's yet another prophecy coming to pass. But anyway, I want you all to know that regardless of your background or religion, you have the opportunity to be saved and have your name written in the everlasting book of life. The key to this is not just going to church and putting a few bucks in the collection tray. It's not just about praying at night, even if you have a strong faith. I strongly urge all of you to skeptically analyze your belief system in terms of your worldview and honestly ask yourself whether you have faith in God or faith in His word or faith in the world and money. Now, I can be terribly honest that I despise the Federal Reserve monopoly money, but that is what the people have faith in. So it is indeed the currency of the land. What good will your money or toys do once you've left this plane? You can't take any of that with you. So it is indeed the treasures we store in heaven that are important, although it takes a great deal of faith to come to this conclusion firmly. God knows and created each and every one of us and does not want to see us deceived by the adversary Lucifer, chief of the fallen angels, the father of all lies, and yet once God's most beloved angel prior to the war in heaven and expulsion of the third of the hosts of angels. Many Christians are out there speculating and expecting the great deception to come any day. However, you all, or many of you, fail to realize that we've been living in the Great Deception our entire lives. Even our grandparents did, and their parents, and so on. Now, most recently, Hollywood has changed the understanding of revelation or apocalypse to be synonymous with the end of the world and terrible things, when in fact they simply mean the unveiling of a long-running deception which has fooled the entire world for generations. And so revelation and apocalypse are actually good things that we should rejoice when we see and come to terms with. God's promise of revelation is being filled before our eyes every day, and the great deception is being unveiled to more and more people every day. I hope and pray that you all will take my testimonial as an experience which I honestly barely described in hardly any detail. I did my best, but it didn't do it any justice. But I hope you take this as an actual experience that I would never dare lie about. Time appears to be running short in terms of our comfortable society. This country was originally founded by Protestant Christians, which is very ironic, and received many blessings from God for many years, in spite of the awful things that were done to the Native Americans and by the African Americans, and these weren't done by everybody. Most people were just regular people, but by certain elements of elitists and government and soldiers following orders, of course. Now that our country has turned away from God almost completely, and the majority of the country rejects Him, mocks spiritual Christian people, and defiles the name and life of Christ at every chance, especially in the mainstream media, sooner or later God will remove His blessings from this place, and He's been doing it, but He will begin to replace them with curses, and He's been doing that. Now, this could get much, much worse tomorrow, or it could progressively get worse over 20 years, but we must always be prepared. Furthermore, even if the day of judgment of the world doesn't come for another 100 years, as I mentioned earlier, each and every one of us watching this video will eventually pass on to the next realm, whether you're old in your bed or in a tragic accident tomorrow. For those of you who are atheists and reject God, I pray that you look at the evidence that clearly proves the heliocentric cosmology is 100% wrong, evolution is a myth, and look at the evidence that clearly proves that we are a creation, not a freak accident of a godless, mindless, chaotic universe spinning around in space within a mediocre galaxy, just one of billions of much larger and important galaxies. The fact is, the Earth itself is the stationary, fixed, immovable plane, just as described in all ancient religions, not just Christianity or, Judeo-Christianism, meaning that the infinite space Big Bang cosmology is a deception so great that if you believe in it, it disproves God in the minds of most people, even those who claim and are really truly faithful Christians. You can only serve one master. You can't read Genesis where it states that the earth is fixed and immovable and that God created things in certain orders and believe the Big Bang Theory. So you have to pick one. Otherwise, you'll be living in a constant state of sort of cognitive dissonance, which, by the way, if you are fundamentally confused about your core belief systems, so if you're a Bible-believing Christian, then you believe in creationism, but if you have any sort of sense about modern science, then you also must believe in the Big Bang Theory. So these two things are completely mutually exclusive, and that sort of confusion at your core puts you in a perfect position for mind control. So just be warned on that. Okay? Most people think institutionalized Christianity as a whole is a whole lot of bull meant for morons who refuse to take responsibility for their actions. Now, honestly, I can't blame them, in a sense that the King James Version Bible has just tons of mistranslations. And of course, the atrocities committed by the Roman Catholic Church throughout history, who are ultimately responsible for the King James Version Bible, just to mention a couple of things. So, popular culture such as music and movies and the news and science are constantly producing subconscious material to bring us all further and further away from a relationship and understanding and a faith in God the Creator. And I'll tell you, it's working like a charm. In closing, although the last few years of my life have been some of the most trying, stressful, unbelievably depressing years in terms of worldly possessions and my business, which I dedicated my life to for many years, which is all but lost, on the other hand, my faith in God the Creator has grown infinitely. I've found that it's nearly impossible to convince atheists to consider the idea of a creator, although they don't have the slightest clue how things were created. Furthermore, it's impossible to convince a scientifically minded person to consider the idea that the world isn't a spinning sphere in outer space, but instead is the world is the physical plane of reality, while the lights in the night sky are merely a secondary feature of the world. However, when you prove to a person, even an atheistic warrior, like my buddy Dave Weiss, that the world lacks curvature, sphericity, axial rotation, orbital motion, this often leads such, self-proclaimed atheistic warriors, it leads them to revisit the teachings of all ancient religions and often brings people back to a faith in God, especially that of the Old Testament and the good news of Yeshua, the Lamb of God. Had you told me 7 months ago that I'd been making this sort of testimonial video, I would have laughed you out of the room, to be honest. 6 months after the experience, I can no longer keep this to myself, as I feel that time is running sort of short, and I feel a moral imperative to try and help people see the obvious self-evidence of the awesome Creator of all things, and the one true path to everlasting salvation. You must follow the teachings of Christ. Do not worship a cross, please. Repent your sins and really try to prove which account of creation is evident in our world, and understand that we've all sinned, we've all done wrong, and the only way to be forgiven for that is to repent from it and accept Yeshua, her Mashiach, or Jesus Christ. Now, a Big Bang explosion which came from nothing nearly 14 billion years ago is the prevailing theory for atheists and scientists, and really the religion of scientism which has deceived the whole world, even though there's no proof for this. And in fact, there's plenty of proof against it. People believe everything is an accident, including life itself, including the creation of the planet, including the Big Bang itself. These are all freak accidents, even though we are all living proof of our Creator, with our DNA and the stationary plane Earth covered with the fingerprint of the Creator, far greater than ourselves. I hope that you faithfully pray to God to help you with your faith, or to prove Himself to you. One thing that God can certainly do in spades is to prove Himself to you, but you must ask for it. You must seek Him out, and you must be ready to be overwhelmed by perhaps the most frightening, awesome, fair, and just power you've ever encountered. What I experienced about 6 months ago, what I believe to be a warning that I was compelled to share, but also an open invitation for anyone willing to really consider their beliefs or really reconsider their beliefs. I also came away from this knowing that what I experienced was merely a fraction of the true power of the Creator. And I would feel terrible if I didn't share this with as many people as possible, regardless of the ridicule and angst and disbelief that I certainly will receive after this. Um, I've lost essentially all material possessions in my life so many times. Okay, so one thing that I forgot to mention, I'm sort of cutting into my original recording, was that after all this was said and done, and I finally went to sleep, when I woke up, I sort of checked the news, and it turned out that those 4 days and 3 nights that I was unable to sleep, there were mudslides and floods in South America, I think also in India. So there was really awful things that had gone on for those, 3 awful nights. And I didn't even know that. I wasn't aware of it until after I woke up and sort of checked the news. I think it was, you know, Tuesday or Wednesday. I tried to find the exact day that this happened, and I just can't, because there was just so much terrible things going on during the months of June and May and June of 2016 all over the world in terms of floods and earthquakes and maybe even tsunamis. But in this particular case, the 4 days that I wasn't able to sleep, there was it was either Venezuela or Brazil or somewhere had been inundated with landslides and floods, and it had happened, at other places as well. So, also, I wanted to let you guys know that I found out yesterday. So right now it's 5:30 in the morning on Saturday, January the 7th, 2017. But I found out yesterday, the 6th of January, that well, let me explain a bit. I rent a room, and I guess what you could call a boarding house. It's a 5 bedroom house where the landlord rents out the rooms to individual tenants, and we share a common kitchen and bathroom areas. And so I found out yesterday by the fire marshal and by the police that the landlord doesn't have the proper permits. We live in the city, so it's not even zoned, and there's also fire safety hazards that essentially the law dictates that she's not able to rent out the rooms in this sort of situation. So we found out yesterday on the 6th that we all must be moved out by Friday the 13th at 3 p.m. or we'll be arrested. So I'm either going to, I guess, go to the homeless shelter, or I'm going to sit here and film myself being arrested for not leaving my home because I have nowhere else to go and no way to get there. A lot of people take for granted having a car or a pickup truck, but if you've gone, any length of time without transportation and an emergency comes up, it's nearly impossible to make a move, right? And so I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen. I'm going to leave it in the hands of God and just pray on it, and maybe I'll film myself going to jail and upload that up after I get out, if I get out. I don't know. I don't know what the sentence is for living in your home, right? But anyway, I cut this in because it's sort of an update to the original recording, and so I apologize for any incongruence here, but we'll just cut right back into the original finish of this. It's almost finished, I promise. I've lost essentially all material possessions in my life so many times, and it's going to happen again. That I have faith that I will survive even if all of you call me a liar and hate me and my YouTube channel goes down to one single subscriber. There's so much more I could have related about this experience, and it's not that I'm embarrassed or anything, but it probably would have taken 8 hours to explain, and even then, I probably couldn't do it justice. Some things are just inexplicable. If you are an atheist or other such of a secular person, I do urge and pray that you skeptically reconsider your position and actually look at the evidence that we are given this life for a purpose. Although we do have free will and are constantly being seduced by the father of lies and deception, whom I believe is indeed at the very top of all the pyramids of power and influence in this world. Again, going to the spiritual wickedness in high places, including, like the Vatican, the Federal Reserve, the world military powers, the world central banking systems, so on. It's up to all of us to become the temple of God and not to go building multi-billion-dollar facilities in order to enrich apostate televangelists as they deceive the masses with false doctrines. That is not a temple of God. True believers are the temple of God. Now, I want to thank you all for listening, and I urge anyone out there unfamiliar with the subject matter that I typically cover in my videos to watch at least one or two of my playlists, which I'll put a link in the description, and I'll also put some cards in the video for your convenience. And I ask you to please prove all things to yourself. And I can assure you that with prayer and faith and actual science, and I'm going to make this clear, I have nothing against science as a process to discern the truth. My problem is with theoretical science becoming law and governing the paradigm of all generations of toddlers for the past 500 years, apparently. God will open a path for you to complete understanding and give you an opportunity to find your name written in the book of life, but you have to seek Him, and He will accept you. So with that, I'm going to shamelessly plug a couple things. If you would like to support this channel, I guess you could say ministry, since this is a testimonial here, but it is needed, although not obligational. You can do so via PayPal to jonelance@gmail.com or through fan funding on YouTube. If you'd like to tithe, check out SOGSS, SOGS with 3 S's, SOGSS.com. It's shelterofgodsundayschool.com, where you can support a Christian orphanage in Pakistan, where all of the proceeds go directly to the ministry. I don't receive any compensation for plugging this website, but it does give me satisfaction to see others get help that they desperately need. Even if they're supposed to be our quote-unquote enemies, according to the government. Shelter of God Sunday School, SOGS.com, is run by my Facebook friend Majida, and you can find information about their group on the website, and donating any amount is very easy and goes a long way. So with that, cheers and God bless. I hope this message finds you all well, and I pray that all of you will at least consider the option that theoretical physics has gotten just about everything wrong, and at least since NASA, we've been living under the greatest deception of all time. Thank you so much for listening. Spread the word, spread the world, and peace. Hey y'all, what's up? John Christopoulos, TheMorgile here for a bit of a different subject material than I usually cover in my videos. Many of you who are familiar with my work know that I'm not exactly a Bible thumper. I really do disagree with the institutionalized religions on so many levels, especially the quote-unquote Holy Roman Empire, which exists to this day under the guise of the Roman Catholic Church. I guess I should explain this a bit, as I don't want to sound prejudiced. I have nothing against Catholics. My mom was raised a Catholic, but I do have a problem with an institution responsible for horrible acts throughout history claiming to represent Christ on earth. A couple quick examples. One would be the whole pedophilia thing within the Roman Catholic Church, but another big one would be known as the Holy Crusades, where the quote unquote Holy Roman Empire commissioned millions of knights to travel to the Middle East and slaughter innocent men, women, and children for ideological and material motives. The knights were, quote, guaranteed salvation in heaven by the leader of the Holy Roman Empire if they went on these quests to go and out and murder and pillage, which is about as anti-Christian as you can possibly get. I mean, murder for Jesus, right? Incidentally, the Crusades spawned some really quite insidious and quite evil secret societies, such as the Knights Templar and the Order of the Dragon, just as a couple examples. The Knights Templar remain a, quote, holy society to this day, and the Order of the Dragon, which was established by the King of Hungary, ultimately spawned the infamous Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dracul, or Dracula, who was indeed the grandson of one of the original Knights of the Order of the Dragon. Briefly, another such awful decree by the Holy Roman Empire was the sort of indifferent and sort of resigned to the, this is what's going to happen. However, it's made me extremely motivated to reach as many people as possible with this message before I'm forced to be finished with YouTube, which is right around the corner, actually. So anyway, don't forget to jump through hoops and ring the bell if you want to stay posted on new videos as they come out. And hopefully I'll be able to continue making videos for as long as possible. So, for a little background, I should have been dead a long time ago, more than once. In fact, I was clinically dead for less than a minute when I was very young. I remember the experience so vividly. I had estimated it, throughout my life to have happened when I was about 5 years old, thinking back on it. Now, just the other day, my mother told me that we were discussing this incident on the phone, just sort of came up in the conversation, that I was actually less than a year old when this happened. So I'll just go ahead and split the difference with her and say I was about 3, early 1980s, simply because my memory of the experience is far too vivid and permanently recorded in the deepest recesses of my mind to have occurred when I was less than a year. I remember it like it was yesterday. So I don't know. I just don't see how I could have possibly been less than a year to remember it this well. So what happened was my parents dropped my brother and me off at our grandparents for the weekend. The very first night we were there, actually within the first few hours of being dropped off, we ate dinner, and then we were sitting around the TV in the living room, eating dessert. I elected for strawberry ice cream, and I was eating the ice cream, watching TV, and something made me laugh with a mouthful of ice cream. Little did I know there was an entire frozen strawberry in the middle of the bite. So when I laughed, I inhaled the entire frozen strawberry, which instantly got lodged into my windpipe. I wasn't laughing anymore. So I stood up, I put my hands up to my neck as to indicate I couldn't breathe or I'm choking, which I later found out is the international hand sign for, hey, I'm choking, so that was pretty sweet. I remember something like immense pressure building up in my head, extreme pain throughout my lungs and then my entire body, and then everything just sort of went gray. I remember having a feeling of consciousness, so I was sort of conscious through this, although I was no longer in this world, or in this body, and rather in a sort of a peaceful, gray, cloudy place, to be honest, with sort of an ambient music, maybe something you could say like very, very distant, faint sounds of like angels singing praises. That's what it sort of sounded like as best as I can remember. Now, although I don't remember much of what it was like for that approximately 30 seconds when my heart had stopped, but it seemed like a rather long time that I was out. From what I can recall, and I don't remember much detail, but it seemed like I was there for quite a while. And when I came to, when I was resuscitated, I didn't know where I was and didn't really remember anything. Now, what I do remember while I was out in this gray fog with no body, but my awareness was still there, was that there was no pain at all, really sort of the opposite of pain, almost like a feeling of complete ecstasy, to be honest. Meanwhile, my grandfather, who was a retired lieutenant colonel, World War II and Korean War veteran, dislodged the strawberry from my windpipe, gave me chest compressions and mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, and I was actually revived before the ambulance got there. And they got there pretty quickly after I came to, and still was trying to figure out where I was at. Now, one thing that I can tell you is that it was extremely painful to come back into the body from this spirit realm or whatever you want to call it. That's the best I can describe it. Uh, Again, while I was there, there was this sort of soft music, peace, and just a gray ambience, and no worries, complete comfort. And so I could have easily been killed for good when I was very young, just sitting there eating a bowl of ice cream, but I was resuscitated, and the most painful thing of it was coming back. Now, I just want to make a point that that's how fragile our lives are. Yet many of us Inquisition, where hundreds or thousands or who knows how many innocent women and children were tortured and burned at the stake for apparently being accused of witchcraft or Satan worship. Any honest Christian must admit that Christ would never condone murdering people for any reason, especially innocent men, women, and children. The fact that the Roman Empire essentially co-opted Christianity long ago under the reign of the Roman Emperor Constantine, and what they did was, the long and short of it is they simply merged their existing pagan idols and festivals with some of the ideologies of Christianity. They sort of picked and chose the books that they wanted in the Bible, mistranslated all sorts of things, things that I verified for myself, mistranslations from the original text to the King James Version. The end result of this charade, starting with Constantine and ending with the Holy Roman Empire, and what we have today in terms of the Vatican, is an evil den of vipers presenting themselves as Christ's vicars on earth and deceiving many, many millions of people into accepting false doctrines and ideologies which are somehow passed off as Christian. Just for one example, worshiping at the statue of Mary is exactly the same thing as worshiping at the statue of Isis or Ishtar, the pagan Roman and goddess who has many other names. Same statue, just change the name from Ishtar to Mary, right? Well, I would say by your fruits you will know them. So just because they claim to come in the name of Christ doesn't mean anything when you look at their actions and how despicable the Holy Roman Empire has been throughout recorded history. Now, with that being said, before I get started with my testimonial, which is extremely personal, and I realize most people won't believe me, I feel that it is something that I must share, even if it's at the expense of all my subscribers, so be it. I've got pretty awesome subscribers, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. Besides, YouTube is involuntarily unsubscribing all my subscribers anyway, so at this point I just have delusions that death is always for some other people in the future or all the poor people in the past, when in fact, none of us, not one of us, never know what day may actually be our last. It really doesn't matter how careful you are, anything can happen. So that was in the early 80s. Let's just fast forward real quick to 2014 in October. Although, suffice to say that I indeed had many other occurrences throughout my life where I can honestly say I don't know how I survived, often without a scratch. But we'll just go to the last one, which was October of 2014. I was hit by a car while driving through a green light on my motorcycle. And I certainly would have been killed were it a nice day out that day, but I was lucky enough that it was a very nasty day. It was cold and raining, and so I was wearing, a full face mask and layers of jeans and leather to keep warm and keep out of the rain. Now, had it been a nice day, my face mask would have been off. I might have been wearing a t-shirt, and my face would have, and my chest would have cracked against the car's windshield without any protection, and I'd have been killed instantly for sure. So this accident sort of if you can imagine, without any insurance. And I did get a settlement, but it wasn't for much. Many months later. But this accident ruined my home-based business, which I had operated for about 4 years at the time. I was accustomed to making really good money every week, and after this accident, because I was a uh, small business owner, a subcontractor, I wouldn't qualify for any sort of disability insurance or anything like that. So, anyway, this whole accident ruined my home-based business, which I had for years. And although I have lost so much, really everything, in terms of material possessions since that accident, and continue to experience major tribulation since, I have gained in revelation of truth and evidence aligned to prove the creator of all things to a degree that I of certainty that to a degree of certainty